So, good evening, everyone, and goedemiddag, should I say, goedemiddag, Dutch, is that good?
Muy bien, muy bien.
So, we are starting one more program of Encontros au Zoo, and today we have an interview with Dutch maestro and pianist Ed Spanjaard. Is that correct? Kind of okay. Okay. So, let me introduce you to the people who are watching us today. So they can feel so lucky as we are here, the three of us, the production team, to have the opportunity to have you. So I got in touch with the works of Maestro Spanjaard through his terrific performance with the new ensemble, which is a terrific contemporary music in Amsterdam. Yeah. So after some research, I found out that he's not only a specialist in contemporary music, guest conducting with all the major new music ensembles in Europe. He's also appreciated for his programs of French music and great symphonic repertoire, with which he performs as a guest conductor with many important orchestra, including the Royal Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. So great pleasure to have you here. We are just discussing what does the name Spanjaard come from? Where does it come from? Could you tell us just once more so people will be enlightened as well?
Yeah, I'm from Jewish parentage. I'm not brought up religiously, but I think the Spaniard, which simply means man from Spain, it's the last name of my father and my grandfather and everybody else. And it probably stems from the 16th century that the Jews from Spain and Portugal were expelled. And now what is quite interesting, before the Second World War, there was a Dutch conductor called Martin Spanjaard. And he was related to my grandfather. And he died in one of the concentration camps. He wasn't even 50. So I never met him. And with a lot of the people who perished in the Second World War, unfortunately, in my country, it was very bad. There was a lot of persecution and about 100,000 people perished in those 5 years. So that's very bad. Fortunately, I have contact with the two grandsons of this Martin Spanjaard, and every now and then from somebody finds a score with inscribed or Martin Spanjaard and a little quote or a photo. And so I try to keep up a little bit of respect for this man whose name I carry and who I never met and who didn't survive the war.
Wow, it's a beautiful story. Yeah, unfortunately, this in Europe was a big tragedy. We in in Latin America we don't have, well, we have other kind of tragedies, but not this. Yes, so we have other, like actually lots of no war. We are not very well known for the wars that in Europe you find more often, but we are known for violence and traffic and all these things, unfortunately. So, but in Amsterdam you have cultural diversity that's equal, mostly equal to the American. I mean the whole continent. This is pretty impressive. Yeah. How do you see that? This affects the music making in
I must say we are very lucky, really, because our town, I live in Amsterdam, which I can reach each part of the town by bicycle.
Oh, wow.
And most of the places I go to is 3 minutes, it's 7 minutes. There are less than 1 million inhabitants.
Oh, wow.
And although it has the benefit of a metropole of culture, the Concertgebouw Orchestra, Royal Concertgebouw, is a fantastic orchestra, and the hall is great. It was built in 1888. I've been there. I've heard there hundreds of concerts. I've conducted there also probably 100 times. Each time, you probably know also that places that have both a history and a quality of sound and occasion, that each time that I'm there, it's like a celebration. And it helps one's concentration. It is for us performing musicians, the hall where you are plays quite an important role.
Oh, yes, I know.
You know, if the space is too small and the acoustic is bad and the light is awful, you need to be very, very dedicated as musicians, players also, to come across in a positive way. And in this sense, we are lucky. The orchestra is great. And all the main international artists come here, the Martha Argerich and all the great conductors. So it's wonderful. And also, although we're quite a small country, we have 17 million inhabitants. There's good variety of music. There's good opera, there's good new music, there's a very lively recital things. Next week I go to recital of Renee Fleming, one of the great American sopranos, and last month I heard Joyce Di Donato, who is a fantastic mezzo. So it is almost as if you can touch all the great sounds and artists that are around in the world this day.
It's a magical hall, yeah. Some people say that nobody knows why it's so special, because nobody can imitate the acoustics at the Concertgebouw. It's impressive. So, Maestro, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you started as a rehearsal pianist at the Royal Opera House, the Covent Garden, and the Bayreuther Festspiele. Have you played in the Bayreuther? Oh, wow, this is impressive. So just tell us about how did you decided to make music? How your parents?
I come from a very musical family. Both my parents were very good amateur musicians. Dad played piano and my mother the flute. So there was a lot of fine music at home. And as a kid, maybe the sound of music put me even more at ease and in a dreamy, warm feeling than words. Also, we lived in a nice place, Haarlem, which is just in between Amsterdam and the North Sea. So it's only 10 miles to the sea and you can swim and it's wonderful. So music was like a language for me and my two brothers already as kids. And as my father was a good amateur pianist, every Sunday we used to play quatre mains, you know, two people at a piano. And my father was a good sight reader. And playing with him, starting with quite simple things, I learned to sight read very quickly. And the job that when I finished, had finished conservatory, I did 5 years conservatory in Amsterdam as a pianist and conducting. Then I went to London to study at the Guildhall School of Music, did an advanced conducting course of 1 year, and I was accepted in Covent Garden, which is a great opera house. And I think it was due to two qualities, if you want, that I'm a very good sight reader. So you can put, you know, there are other things I'm not good at. I'm not a good improviser. For instance, some people are great at improvising. Some people are great at playing jazz. I'm a very good sight reader. And I had been taught 4 or 5 languages in school. So if you work on Italian opera, in French opera, on German opera, that was quite accessible to me. And when you coach in opera and you coach the soprano, you may have to sing in the tenor or the baritone with understandable words and work on the psychology and the pitch and everything. And I enjoy that. And being a repetiteur means that you have to play for rehearsals, you have coach singers, you assist conductors. So I was often assisting Colin Davis, who was then the chief conductor, worked a lot with him. I was prompting. You know what prompting is?
You have to say I think you have to say the word when the singer.
And so in the orchestral pit under the stage, there are the 80 musicians, and in between the double basses, I went on a little staircase.
Oh my goodness.
Then I had a piano score, a bluish television where you see the conductor and a opening to the stage. And so, for instance, if the text says Il Tiranno, then I say Il Tiranno, bang, and I give the cue.
Oh,
that's what they used to do. In Holland, they never do it. In London, it was every performance. And when you listen to old live recordings of Maria Callas, you always hear the prompter. Why? No. Because Maria Callas was so short-sighted. She was on stage without glasses, and the contact lenses were not yet invented. So she could not make out the conductor. So if you hear Maria Callas in Dallas, in Mexico, in La Fenice, you always hear in the famous operas, first you hear the voice of the prompter. So that is the thing I did, and I had the luck to prompt in performances with very great conductors like Carlos Kleiber and Riccardo Muti. So you take some of their gestures, their approach, their way of rehearsing into your memory and understanding of the trade. And probably what taught me most in becoming a conductor, in the Concertgebouw, as a student, I could always walk in. And when the Concertgebouw had a rehearsal, with John Barbirolli or Kirill Kondrashin or Bernard Haitink or Carlo Maria Giulini, I was sitting in and I had my little pocket score and I wrote in, now he says something very witty, and I wrote what he says. Now he says something very unkind. This passage is a big problem because he had to repeat it 6 times and it's still not together. And that, as well as my own appreciation of what he or she made work very well and which aspects I didn't quite think were successful. So it starts a process in your head. What is practical? What is actually helpful? But also sometimes negative things. When do the musicians get tired or bored? Or at what sort of comments? For instance, there was once a conductor doing the opening of the great Schubert Symphony No. 9. Starts with horns. I don't even, is it ta, ti, ti, pam, 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 pi, pa, pam? I think it's that. I'm not even 100% sure. And it's 2 horns playing for 4 or 6 bars. And they played it well. It was the Concertgebouw. But the conductor stopped them and he said something about bar 2. Played it again. Then he stopped him again, said something about breathing before bar 4. Then he stopped him again. Then he said something about thinking of a crescendo. And after 8 times, nobody knew anymore what he meant and whether you could play it upside down. So you have to be, you need to try and be, as a conductor, I think, your ears, very important. Of course, also what you have read in the score, because that is your Bible. You have to be very, there's also an aspect of intuition or in the moment of what can work now. If I feel well with an orchestra, I get also quite a lot of associations. I remember from when I was a beginner that you write in your score now here, the flute should not be dominated by the trumpet. And if you hear that the flute is not strong enough, you may stop the rehearsal and say, make sure that the flute is not dominated by the trumpet. But now, because I have so much experience, after taking in all the details of the composition, you try to associate and listen and be open to gestures, personalities. And that is why usually I love rehearsing, because I try to be really open. One of the things I found very difficult when I started, and it's for most young conductors, you feel quite a lot of insecurity, because the first time you do a Beethoven Fifth, you know that the concertmaster had played it for 35 years, you know, and he says, why is this young person telling me what to do? That can be off-putting. And of course, with experience and with the years adding up, you find more confidence in being yourself. And yeah, what is tricky about conducting, you need to be very sensitive, because if you want to make a lot of music is very sensitive, you know, like a slow movement of a Brahms symphony, or L'après-midi d'un faune by Debussy, or a part of Stravinsky's Firebird, which has very clashy, outgoing sounds, but also sorceries, magical, gentle music. So when you conduct music like that, I believe a conductor has to be sensitive too. You cannot just conduct the Berceuse in L'Oiseau de Feu and do, you know, this is it, you know, and bassoon now you just play. You want to share the feeling of something which is maybe melancholic, maybe dreaming, maybe pastoral, maybe distantiated. And when you do things like that, I love it to be able to connect with that atmosphere. And so be sensitive, but at the same time, the conductor has to have a little bit, to put it strongly, of an elephant skin. Because if the second oboe is in a bad mood, Mr. Spaniard, I don't understand your beat. We've all had those moments, you know. And you don't want to be like that. You must try and be able to continue. So that is a thing where experience helps to find a balance between being open and feeling sure about what the composer through you wants to communicate.
Oh, very beautiful. Do you give master classes, or only at the school, at the conservatory?
I teach at the conservatory in Amsterdam. I have about 5 bachelor students and 4 master students. And the master students I share with 2 other very fine conductors. One Irish, Kenneth Montgomery, who's been living in Amsterdam for a long time. And the other one, Jacques van Steen, a very well-known Dutch conductor. And we are very fine colleagues, but our styles are very different. But we never, there's never an issue about it. And what I really think is worthwhile for a gifted student, that from the 3 of us, very different personalities, he can understand and accept different elements. And I noticed that the students that are not only gifted, but also clever. For instance, we had a Swedish guy who did his final concert 2 months ago with a professional orchestra, conducting with a soloist, an overture, and a big symphonic poem by Sibelius. He did a very good exam. Last 2 weeks, he was in Switzerland taking a master course with Jaap van Zweden, and he won a prize.
Oh, wow.
So that is also wonderful for us to hear, that the way we could help him to feed from different angles may have added. And yeah, you quite often when I teach, I play from the score myself. Sometimes, of course, we have pianists in class or two pianists, but it is not, even some very good piano players are not very good at playing for conductors, because they don't often understand, you know, the difference between a beat which is like that and a beat which is like that, or the timing, or they cannot quite imagine when you play from a score, you will try to have the orchestral color in your head. For instance, if the second violins and the violas would play it's a lot of notes on the piano, but maybe it is a very secondary voice, like in the opening of Mozart G minor, the second violins and the violas, but if you play it too loud on the piano, you get a totally stupid sound. So that's quite an art to play well. And when I play, the advantage for me is that I can really sense, not only technically if it's correct, but for instance, say there's a modulation which may be, for instance, in the double bass. Just suppose the bass is T for many bars, and then it suddenly goes to pa, which gives us different color to the harmony. And if the conducting student is not aware of the bass line and not aware of the changing color of the harmony, I feel it. I feel that it's lacking when I play, and so I can comment on that.
I see that you conducted the Così fan tutte with the orchestra of the 18th century. So do you have any contact? Well, we probably have, because you were in Holland. Yeah, we say Holland in Brazil. I'm sorry, but it's in the Netherlands.
Yeah, Holland is fine. Holland
is fine. Yeah, somebody correct me once. So, so do you have any contact with the early music research, or I say research because it's always feeding from the new performances?
There were two conductors whose rehearsals I followed dozens of times. That was Frans Bruggen, who founded the orchestra of the 18th century. He lived 100 meters from my house, and we were quite friendly. We admired each other's art. So when I actually, unfortunately, he died. He was a great personality. He was very witty also. And once I said, Frans, can you give me 10 rules for a generalistic conductor like me? Because I conduct St. Matthew Passion, but I've also done 400 world premieres. General rules for conducting classical music. And he wrote quite a few rules. Actually, maybe if I find it very quickly, I get it.
Fantastic.
I think I've got it. And sometimes when he occasionally did a modern piece, which was not, he was a great musician, but he didn't have a very good technique. And when once he did a Stravinsky concerto for strings, and he said, can you help me? And his favorite cafe was just between his and mine house. It's about a minute and a half walk. So we sat there. And there was an issue that there's a bit where you conduct in 6/8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, and then it goes to 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. And he thought it was 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 and 2, so that the conductor's gesture stays in the same tempo. I said, no, Frans, it is Ya ta ta ti 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 ta pa 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 pa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 and 2 and 3. It is like I want to be in America. I want to be in America. And he took out his fountain pen and he wrote in this Stravinsky score. He had a very beautiful handwriting. He wrote in Stravinsky, so I want to. But I went to so many of his rehearsals, and that was delightful because he was very witty and incredibly original. This is actually don't know if you can see it. This is Frans Brugge. This is me. It's about 12 years ago, and this is what he started to write for me.
Oh, wow. It's all in Dutch, unfortunately.
It's in Dutch. And some are quite witty. One of them is, let the tuning not take ages, and let it not be so noisy. It should not take longer than 21 seconds. Another one, make sure that the first desks of the strings are not outplaying the rest. You know, it's because they sit close to the conductor, and sometimes it's true, actually, they want to sort of show how good they are, and then you don't always hear the people from the back. Now, as I have this book in front of me, do you remember conductor Leopold Stokowski?
Of course, yes. Disney.
This is Stokowski and me 50 years ago.
Oh, how old are you? Wow, Stokowski.
20. I'm 20.
Wow. Were he student? Did you study with him?
No. I was playing double bass in the youth orchestra, and he was not conducting our youth orchestra, but the best players. There was a festival of 10 youth orchestras coming together in Switzerland in 1969. And from all the best players from Boston and from Stockholm and from Amsterdam, he composed an orchestra. And I was at the rehearsals. My greatest treasure is a postcard from Stravinsky.
Oh, wow.
I was 10. I'd written him a letter which my mummy had translated to English. And hang on, it is.
Yeah, we can see it.
He says.
What's it say?
It says, all the best, Igor Stravinsky, Hollywood, 1960.
Wow.
Amazing. And that, a strange coincidence. I wrote him as a boy of 10 because I loved the soldier's tale, L'Histoire du Soldat. And I don't know what I wrote. My mother translated it into English. And 13 years later, my professional debut was indeed Stravinsky's Soldier's Tale with the Netherlands Wind Ensemble.
Wow.
And another fine thing is a letter from Pierre Boulez.
Oh, wow.
I knew him well, and I've conducted a lot of his music, and I had gone to Paris to talk about Le Marteau sans Maître and Éclat Multiple. And the day later, he wrote me, good luck with your performance. I've changed some notes. Pierre Boulez.
Oh, no.
Wonderful.
Great.
This was not prepared. It was just improvised.
But this is a good thing about being at home, right? Oh, I remember this. Fantastic. I guess we could listen to just a little bit of your trio, the Trio Belle Image. This is with your brother, is it? The cello is your brother?
The cello is my brother, and the violinist is, she was in the final of the Tchaikovsky violin competition in the late 60s, when she was oh no, the middle 60s, when she was 16 or 17, studied a year with Oistrakh.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 years ago, she completely quit playing.
Oh my goodness! Why?
And, because she was still good, but she needed to practice so much. And, generations come and go. You may know the Dutch violinist Janine Jansen, who is a world-class violinist, and Jaap van Zweden before that. So she felt she had sort of become a little more in the background, although she was still a good chamber music maker, but she stopped playing. And my brother, who plays the cello, although he did conservatory, was a bacteriologist. He never pursued a professional career. So it's a curious thing.
It's pretty good. Well, just before we listen to it, is it common in Holland, to play like just for fun, in classical music players?
Yes.
Is it common? Yeah, because in Brazil we go to the bar and we play some some pandeiro and some just sing and guitar. This is common, but classical music players, like just to meet to play together, this I don't think this is very common. I might be wrong, but in Holland this is.
It is quite common, at least when I was a kid with my parents, who were good amateur musicians. There was a lot of music making. It felt very natural, and very often in the weekend there was a woman. I was born in Haarlem, and a very good friend of us was a nice violinist. She was living in Rotterdam, and very often every 3 or 4 weeks she stayed a weekend with us, and it was lovely music making.
Oh, that's great. So let's hear the piano trio by Hans Henkemans. Is a Dutch composer. So we end with Maestro playing the piano. So let me check.
I don't hear again.
Yes, that's fine.
Cynthia, you know, this is weird that you play this, because we played it from the manuscript.
Oh.
It was written in the 30s. 5 years ago, it was found in the library of the Dutch radio. It has never been edited. It has never been recorded. But in a way, it's interesting although this is not among the better pieces of the composer, Hans Henkemans was an interesting composer and he was a great pianist himself. I knew him very well. And just now, is a quite interesting coincidence. He died 25 years ago. He's been forgotten. But just now, a wonderful documentary of his life and his fairly sad ending of his life, because he became very depressed and he was forgotten, is made, and it will be played in the Dutch Film Festival. And it's very fine. And I just sent a chat. Could you read it?
Yes, yes.
Because you will find that Lisa Verstman, who is one of our great violinists, with her I play a bit from the violin sonata of the same composer, which is a masterpiece. And we recorded it in without public in Corona time. And that is really a very fine piece to hear. And what I enjoyed at this Henkemans, who was like an uncle for me, through the film and several interviews that I and other people have had about him, starts to have a revival.
Oh, very nice.
Beautiful.
We don't know many Dutch composers. Well, we know just the Renaissance composers mostly.
Sweelinck. Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck, maybe?
Yes, yes. But we are not, well, Toon de Leeuw.
Toon de Leeuw, yeah.
Toon de Leeuw, yes. And who else? The kind of minimalist composer. What's his name? Very famous, very famous.
Louis Andriessen?
Yes, yes. Well, we know just a few figures, but I feel that we need to learn more about them. We never know enough.
Do you remember? There's a famous Dutch visual artist, Escher. It's the artist. You know him?
Yeah, of course.
Where the birds become fish. That sort of thing. And his nephew was one of our best composers, also with the same last name. I will write you a few. These composers are among the more interesting Dutch composers. Diepenbrock was a close friend of Mahler's, and especially his music to Electra, which is the old Greek tragedy. I find a very fine piece. Willem Pijper was very compressed music. His third symphony is on YouTube with me conducting. It's the last thing I conducted before the lockdown early last year. That's a very nice piece. Toon de Leeuw, as you rightly mentioned, is a very interesting composer. He started in his 20s after the World War as a sort of Bartokian sound, some lovely music. Then he studied with Messiaen in Paris, also married a French wife, and then he became very orientated towards Oriental music and African music, and their ways of tone scales and time constellations became important in his work. You'll find quite a lot of his music on YouTube in all the styles. So let's say the early Bartokian style, then the spatial. He's also written 4 pieces that's called spatial music. A big piece for when the Concertgebouw existed 100 years, the orchestra in 1988. Then Rudolf Escher is an interesting composer, also of chamber music, who was the nephew of the visual artist. Theo Louvendi, I like very much. He's the only one still alive. He's 90. And what is interesting about him, he comes from the jazz. He's been a very fine saxophone player. and was married to a Turkish woman. He speaks also Turkish. He has a very natural feeling for folky things, not cheap things, but things that have a real folk-like openness, playfulness, spontaneity, also bordering on the improvisation. And there's, for instance, a work by Louvendi, which I love, which is only 7 instruments and one female singer, called 6 Turkish Folk Poems. Very much worth listening to.
Oh, great. I will try to listen to more Dutch music. I seem that we don't have this in school, you know, like we are not, we learn about European music a lot, but not it's just strange.
Partly it's our own fault, because we are unlike the French and the English, who are more chauvinistic. You know, they will promote. Maybe they're composers. Of course, we don't have composers as great as Debussy and Ravel. Absolutely not. And the English with Elgar and Vaughan Williams are also quite strong, but we are rather withdrawn. Now, the last Dutch masterpiece that I conducted the premiere of, and you really should look it up, is this work.
Oh, let me just see something. Oh, we are going to play the 30 situations a little bit later.
Okay.
But I will check on that. I don't know if I found it. Huh?
This piece is a cello concerto with 10 Western instruments and 10 instruments from China, from Japan, from Azerbaijan, from Turkey, all incorporated into a wonderful sound world. It is a masterpiece. It is one of the greatest new works I've ever conducted. It's really, also you find also film impression of it.
So now that we are talking about, how do you say his name? Joël Bons?
Joël Bons. Joël Bons.
So let's just turn to the new ensemble and talk a little bit about it. So you've conducted the Ensemble Intercontemporain, the Moderne, the Klangforum Wien. Let me just close everything. And so as a guest conductor to all these incredible ensembles, but the new ensemble is something, at least me, I didn't know the ensemble before. So could you just tell us how it was created? I know that Joël Bons is the artistic director. I think something I read, right?
Yeah, it originated in 1980 because there was a short play of Shakespeare being done called Venus and Adonis, and Louvendi, the last penultimate composer's name I mentioned, wrote music for it with a very strange instrumentation: 1 violin, 1 bass clarinet, a guitar, a mandolin, and Turkish percussion.
Oh.
And they played the theater music with the play dozens of times, but the music was so good that they decided, let's not lose each other. This was 1980, and in the next 3 years, they decided, let's have a cello, let's have a harp, let's have a piano, let's have an oboe. And then in about 1982, the setup was more or less finalized, and I became the conductor. And I have stayed conducting until the 5th of December in a year and a half ago, 19, because our stupid government had been economizing so much on arts that we had to stop. We are dead now, the ensemble, which is really awful. But what you were saying, Cynthia, maybe you want to know what is so special about the new ensemble compared to all those foreign groups. So to the new ensemble, I always go by bicycle. And it is really like the quality of the players is incredible. Well prepared, a lot of temperament in the best sense of the word, not temperament in 10 tricks, you know, but there was always a feeling of warmth, friendship, fun also. And everybody was as an individual really contributed to the feeling of finding a fine sound quality and being open and inquisitive. I've always loved it, and there were years that we were incredibly busy. There were times that in 2 weeks we had 15 world premieres.
Wow.
We've done big operas. We've also done some operas that were rescored for, like we did a Poulenc opera and we did a Martineau opera, and they were rescored, and a Britten opera, Benjamin Britten, to 15 solo instruments. And we traveled a lot. We've endless times to Italy, very often to Paris, but also Edinburgh and Berlin and the States and China, a few times to China too.
How is the, just curious, how is the public for contemporary music in the Netherlands? It's
now not easy. There was around 1970 a big political musical movement, which we call the Nutcracker movement. And people like Louis Andriessen, our best known composer, and Reinbert de Leeuw, who was a very well-known pianist and conductor, they interrupted a concert, a classical program with Bernard Haitink and the Concertgebouw, making noise. They were very aggressively interrupting, and they said, we don't want this old Baroque flute concerto anymore. We need more modern music. And it became, Frans Brugge was among them too.
Oh, wow.
And Frans Brugge, there's a television relay of a heated discussion, and Frans Brugge said every note of Beethoven that the Concertgebouw Orchestra plays is a lie. Now, the strange thing is that all those men, there were no girls in that group at that time. Most of them had a very good career. Most of them became pure establishment. So 20 years later, their symphony was played by the Concertgebouw Orchestra, and their opera was done here. And but it had some negative repercussions, of course, for the older generation of composers, like the Henkemans, whose trio you played a bit from. He was thrown in the rubbish bin. So for him, it was a very dramatic move. The good aspect of it is that the musical scene realized that we cannot only stick to orchestras of 90 musicians. Let's be more practical. Let's work with improvisation. Let's combine with jazz. Let's make an ensemble of 15 or 20 people. And that was in the 70s and 80s a very lively and important movement. And around 1990, when we had a program, we played it in Amsterdam, we played it in Utrecht, we may play it in the north or in Rotterdam or in Maastricht. And in our last 5 years, because the finances became so restricted, quite often we played a very tricky program only once. So that was not so easy.
It was not so easy.
But still, I must say, even if we play the program only once, I can really say that nearly every rehearsal and concert, this was almost like a party. And it was intense and happy. It was a very happy time. And funnily enough, Joël Bons, who we talked about yesterday, I had a meal with him and his wife, live in the north of Amsterdam, and we both miss also the social warmth of those musicians that were also creative as friends and as music thinkers.
So just to understand a little better, so this ensemble has some ethno music roots. There's some combination, because you said you use both classical music instruments and also from other traditions. So is it common? It's like it's part of the mission of the ensemble, or it's just like something that you do now and then?
No, it was a new idea. It was a sort of semi-split off, a sort by Joël Bons 20 years ago. And he was always fascinated in the, when we started working 30 years ago with the Chinese composers, we often played with Chinese instruments, like the pipa, which is a mouth organ going up, or a dizi, which is a flute, or a zhang, which is a flat thing with many strings and which are plucked. All with very characterful, very interesting color, and all of those instruments had an enormous history of sound, but of works written for them, and of playing. Pipa is like a lute instrument where you have extra plectra on your fingers.
In your finger. Oh,
and
but this. Sorry.
And later in Turkey and in Syria and in Azerbaijan, we found other instruments that in their tradition were incredibly meaningful and gave a very special color. And when we did our first program, this group was called the Atlas Ensemble.
Yeah, this is when we.
And you are right that you say it is also has to do with the new ensemble, because the Western musicians in it, be it 8 or 10, were always players from the new ensemble. But the 10 or 15 faraway musicians were these exotic instruments. And as you can imagine, for the first time we did it in 2002, it was very difficult to find composers who were capable of composing not only for flute and harp, but for instruments that you'd never held in your hand. So Joël made practical introduction films where, for instance, the kemençe, that is a little, tiny little violin with which you play like this from Turkey. What are traditional sort of notes? What can you do with it? What are the special, peculiar beauties of it? And the very first concert we gave was in 2002 in the Berlin Philharmonie. And the next day, literally the next day, Simon Rattle has his first concert, official concert, as chief director of the Berlin Philharmonic, and I was in his opening concert. And it was funny. I knew him because I studied in London. He's a few years younger than me, but I already realized how gifted he was when he was 19. I'd heard him. So that was the origin of the Atlas Ensemble. And although the new ensemble has no more subsidy, the Atlas Ensemble can every 2 or 3 years, there's still a little bit of money, have a project. And if we are invited, for instance, I know that Montreal in Canada wants to have this composition Nomaden by Joël Bons, which is also an Atlas Ensemble composition. And twice it was planned. Last year, February, we would go, but of course it fell through Corona. So hopefully it'll still happen someday.
So let's just listen, Nicole, the Joël Bons, you wait. 30 situations. That's just the beginning, because the video is also incredible. The illumination, the lighting. Just a sec. It's a pity.
Right.
we want to listen, but we're going to put the links in the video so people can see where does it come from, because I don't think the transmission is also too good anyway, but it's just an example of your work. So I'm very curious, how did you start conducting new music? Was it like a necessity, or it was just a taste?
I remember that was at a conservatory. There was a conductor who was a little bit older than me, and he was asked to prepare Schönberg Pierrot Lunaire with the speaking voice and the small ensemble. And this conductor was very gifted, but he was also quite lazy. And he thought, 3 or 4 rehearsals in a week, we'll have it. It's not possible. So it was not performed. And I, as an eager beginner, they thought, well, let's try him. And we worked hard at it. We enjoyed it. We had very fine young musicians, and we performed it quite a few times. And I found it fascinating, and I noticed that I enjoyed, apart from the fact that this is a musical masterpiece, also the intellectual challenge I like. Now, all music making has some intellectual, maybe you're not even aware of it. Some can be very intuitive. And if the intellectual aspect is the main thing, music can become very dry and uninteresting. But I've always found that a trigger too. And nowadays, when you conduct new music, you have a beautiful print in Finale or Sibelius. But until 10 years ago, I had hundreds of handwritings. Sometimes they were terrible to read. And so it's like, some people are good at making cryptograms puzzles. And this was my musical cryptogramic gift, probably. I enjoyed it.
But so I think we have to finish now. But just to end this conversation, kind of, I hope like we had like 1 month at least just to talk to you every day a little bit. We're going to know more and more about music. It's just about music. I thought I was going to learn about your life, but you're teaching us a lot more than we imagined, actually. So I know the new ensemble, you sent me some links of the new ensemble with in this collaboration with Brazil in 2009, I guess. It was incredible. So I just talked to Caio, who was the one who actually articulated it, I guess. Yeah, it was incredible, this kind of thing. And also you said about the kind of ethno roots of the Atlas, that you had this Atlas. I think there was something that I read, it was like Atlas Lab.
Yeah.
It was something that maybe helped with this instruments, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The new.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Atlas Lab is that we don't need the money and the organization to get all those 30 people because that is very costly. But we ask 2 or 3 of the Oriental exotic master players and combine them with 2, 3, or 5 young musicians, maybe wonderful players from the conservatory, ask some young composers to make beginnings and trying out what they can do with this combination, and so that it's less costly, but the exotic musicians will give short master courses and will give concerts with their wonderful instruments, and so it's enlightening, and that still happens every 2 years or so.
So just to try to summarize a little bit, all these things, these actions that you've done, the new ensemble, the Atlas. So what do you think music can dialogue with the society, with the communities around, and especially how do you think it can continue to survive? Yeah, especially because we have to renew it, right? So new music is the only way to renew it. Otherwise, we're gonna have the Nutcracker again. So like in the 10 years, you're gonna have another Nutcracker.
Pretty good, by the way.
Oh yeah. So how do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I found the combination with musicians from other cultures, really foreign cultures whose language you do not speak. I used to have a list of Turkish, Chinese, and Russian words, only the very little bit, because quite a few of those players did have no English. So, for instance, Baştan means let's go from the beginning in Turkish. And Çekedifang in Chinese, Çekedifang means this passage. And of course, it is a slight, but it is a sign I like combined things. And I found that the waves of sympathy from those musicians from totally different cultures were really heartwarming. And the first rehearsal of Nomaden, the other piece by Joël Bons, which I think is even greater masterpiece than 30 Situations, is among the most moving conducting experience I've had. I remember that when I started rehearsal with those people, quite a few of them I knew from earlier Atlas projects.
Mm-hmm.
And we loved each other, although we could not really communicate in language, but you communicate in another way.
Mm-hmm.
And amidst the turmoil of wars and persecutions and dictators, I cannot say that I contributed in this way, but it made me feel very happy that with our language of music, which is a wordless, magical, masterful way of communicating, I'm very happy that I can speak that language. And it gives me contact and warm emotionality, possibly with thousands or millions of people. And that is the slight contribution of world peace, to say it in a pompous way, that I think we could realize.
Maestro, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you here. Well, have you here, just here, it's a pity. Well, it's a pity that you cannot be here with us, but at least you're here somehow with us, and everything worked out fine. I guess I don't know we don't know when we're going to present the interview. I hope sometime very soon, because I want people to know at least a little bit of you. Yeah, I guess this interview gives us some sense of what you mean with your emotions, with the music, and how it is to work with you. Actually, I guess it must be very fun, very meaningful. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm going to say thank you very much for those who is watching us, who will watch the video. And I hope you also enjoy this conversation, this very small conversation, and you can enjoy the videos. We're going to post the videos in the description. So once again, I hope you are fine in the Netherlands, and that you're safe there, and that your music can spread all over the world, and especially here in Brazil. So it was a very nice time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a splendid initiative. I really felt we were very open and sympathetic to each other's territory of interest, which is large. And I also thank Nicole and Douglas for their technical support, and that we found our voices again, because that is what communication is all about. So, okay. Cynthia, I hope to be in contact with you again. Thank you very much.
Oh, I hope so too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.